welcome to Beyond the Call podcast, where we tell the stories of those people behind the jobs we rely on. We go into the good, the bad and the ugly, and we shine a light in what can be a dark place. Just a warning, the content can be graphic and distressing, so please use your discretion. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform and our social media. And if you have feedback, I read every single one. Let's get on to this episode of Beyond the Call. Okay, welcome back everyone for another episode of Beyond the Call. This is part 2 of our conversation with Lori Hodges. Just got to check, is it Lori or Lori? What do you prefer?
Lori. Yeah.
Lori. So Lori is an emergency management specialist in America, and we've talked about all of life's problems, AI, and all that sort of stuff, and her history as a paramedic. And we're going to keep going with our conversation. So I do encourage you to make sure you've listened to part 1. So Lori, the big topic overall, the big thing over where you are at the moment is you've had a couple of little what we call blows back to back. For us, they're cyclones. They're hurricanes, and I live in North Queensland, so cyclones are, we get a lot of them. We're ready for them, and as much as you prepare as much as you can, but you can never predict what's going to happen. Our biggest cyclone in recent years is Cyclone Yazi. We moved to Townsville about 10 days before it hit, and it was a Category 5, and it had an eye that was it was about 200 kilometers wide, and it was very destructive. We were extremely lucky that it went in between 2 major cities of Cairns and Townsville. And then and it obviously caused devastation for the smaller towns in between that. We didn't have any loss of life until afterwards, when unfortunately one gentleman lost his life from carbon monoxide poisoning because he used a generator inside the house. So there's lessons in that, moving on. We obviously lose power. And it still amazes me how much power is above ground. And I guess it's a financial thing, but moving forward, this seems like a problem that can be overcome, but that's, the mine's better than my own. How did you go in your recent events, and what was your role?
So, I live in Colorado, so I'm landlocked. But we have what's called EMAC, Emergency Management Assistance Compact, and that's state to state mutual aid. So one governor can ask another governor for assistance. And so since I'm still on an incident management team. I've been on one for about 20 years. And then I'm also, trained obviously in an emergency operations center as an emergency manager. So the governor for Florida sent out the request saying that he needed people who could supplement emergency managers within each county to assist them in the response to these hurricanes. So we actually deploy out prior to the hurricane. We get embedded into a local county, into their emergency management program. We learn about it, and then the hurricane comes through, and then we start the response really right away. If they wait to deploy us until after the hurricane, really we're there 2 or 3 days too late. So that's why they kind of embed us early. So that's what I did. Was they knew that Hurricane Helene had already hit Florida, and they were already dealing with, several thousand homes that had been destroyed in a big storm surge. So when Hurricane Milton was on its way, they thought it was going to be Cat 3 at the time. And so they brought us in to embed with the local emergency managers. And then this one ended up being a Category 5. But then I think by the time it made landfall, it was Category 3 again, something around there. So anyway, I was in a county where really the eye of the storm was coming straight for us. I was in Tampa, Florida. But we were in a good place. We weren't in a place where the surge was going to hit us. And obviously I was in a fortified building because it's the emergency operations center. So my job really was to learn the different roles in the emergency operations center. So if once things stabilized, we could give them a break so they could get some rest, and we could take over their jobs for them, because they had already worked for 2 weeks on the hurricane earlier. So they were just starting to get, they were just tired, and now they're dealing with another hurricane that's worse, and it hit their county harder. And so really we're just kind of a force multiplier for them.
Yeah. People have to understand that these are 24-hour roles when you're at With ours, we call them, we have sort of levels. So we call them alert, lean forward, stand up, and then stand down type of thing. So I don't know if you have a similar thing. But one alert is basically, okay, something could be coming. Let's just, let's get some minor stuff in place. And then when you stood up, then basically all of your people get involved and it is manned until the event is over. Now, if it's something that is short term, that could be over in a
Right.
night. If it's, or it could last for weeks and weeks and weeks. If it's a big heat wave, they can be up for weeks. Um, and it is exhausting. And there is so much logistics and there is so much more that goes on behind the scenes than the average Joe Blow understands. So give us an insight into the type of thing. And also the fact that you have to go into somebody else's
Right.
format. You said you do it differently in your state. So or in your county. So how does that go? Do you find yourself having to bite your own tongue at times?
Well, yeah, sometimes. But really what it is like I mentioned, every emergency operations center is different, but they all do the same things. They all do resource management. You get resources into the community. You do public information management where you're talking to the public about alerts, warnings, or preparedness events, or, once the event actually occurs, what are the assistance programs that are available to them, right? So all that's the same regardless of where you go. It's just how they do it, the minor tweaks and everything. And then also what's their capacity, right? So I've been in emergency operations centers where it's a one person shop and they don't have any staff at all and they don't have a program because they haven't built up the process. So in those cases, we come in and we build it as we go and we bring in the right people to kind of manage it throughout that event and then we pass it back to them at the end. In this case, the county that I was in is a robust county. It has 1.5 million people.
Yeah.
They had a very robust emergency operations center with over 100 people in it. And so what we did was we each had kind of a skill set. And so they knew that I'm an emergency management director. And so I told them I could really be in any of your sections. They did an incident command model. So they put me in the planning section. So just each day I just learned what somebody did in their position. The next day they would be off and I would take that position while I was learning the next person's.
Yeah.
So as I went through the 14-day
Yeah.
deployment, I just worked a different job each day because I'm used to that environment and I can move about pretty easily. I'm not stuck in kind of one role. And then the stuff that
Yeah.
we did was really, I mean, it's all really recovery, but they had hundreds of thousands of power outages. And I absolutely agree with you. I don't know why power lines are not buried in these areas because we have them buried in my city that I live in. It just, we get high winds and nothing happens. So, and if you're going to have to repair it all anyway, you might as well just bury it when you're repairing it. But total side note.
And we are a culture, and we are a society that relies on power. If you when people start to lose power for a week or 2 weeks, everything
Yeah,
gets worse.
exactly. Talk about
Yeah,
consequences. Oh my
patient
goodness.
gets worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. So after we had a cyclone come through this year, late January, we lost power. We were actually lucky at our house. We lost the power for 4 hours, so we were great. But other places, others had it for 4 to 5 days. But immediately after the cyclone, our temperatures were I think we had temperatures of about 38, 39 degrees Celsius with a feels like of about 53. I'm guessing that's about 120 to
Oh yeah, that's
125
too much.
Fahrenheit. It was disgusting. And people were booking out all the hotels in town because we don't actually, most of us don't have
Right.
generators. If that, for a cyclone prone area, we are very nonchalant in the way we live.
Well, and I do think the reason people are nonchalant is they know that there are people that are going to come help them, and I don't like that part of it. Like
Yeah.
I see that people don't understand everything that we do in these events, all the background stuff, but people also have this knowledge that if they get into trouble, they pick up the phone and somebody's going to come their way and they need to get out
Yeah.
of that because in these
Yeah.
big events, we can't get to everybody all at once. So, and then that's when you hear the horror
Absolutely.
stories about things that happen to people because they weren't prepared or they didn't take the
Yeah.
action that they needed to take.
I hate the word resilience. I think it's a politically used poorly. Resilience often means, they can sort it themselves. But as a community, we need something along the lines of resilience where we need to be able to back for ourselves for a couple of days. If power's out, people are panicking because they don't have milk or bread. Well, guess what? You can survive
Yeah.
without milk or bread.
Yeah, you have some canned
You
food.
know, people don't think they can, but yeah, there's stuff you can actually have that doesn't need to be refrigerated, and you aren't going to die in 4 days. So, as a culture, as a society, I think we've become very yeah unresilient, and that's again, it's a word I hate, but we've got to stop relying on
Yeah.
other people, uh, and yeah, allow and it's not hard to have a gas barbecue out, and have some food that you can cook on it,
Yeah, use your camp
bit of
stove,
spam. Yeah, it's
if you
not
have a
it's
camp stove.
exactly, you can boil a kettle. There's this, you can
Exactly.
survive. But and like you said, we expect people to turn up. Medications, especially with cyclones, hurricanes, those sort of predicted events, there's no excuse to be out of a
Right.
medication.
Well, yeah, you have 3 or
They
4 days
don't
notice.
come up. That's it. They don't they're not
Yeah.
tornadoes, and we very, very rarely get tornadoes here. We actually had one up here, really about 12 years ago, 10 years ago, that was the only tornado I've ever experienced in this country. And, yeah, that I can understand because there's no
Right.
warning that's coming. We don't get tornadoes. It came at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's fine. But a cyclone, you get, uh, look, if heads are going to roll if you haven't got
Right,
2 days
exactly.
notice.
Yeah.
It's not hard to prepare, and then we've got to look after as a society, we have to look after the people that can't just nip to the
Right.
shops. Make a phone call. What do you
Yeah,
need?
our motto here in our county is doing the most good for those who need it most. And so what we teach people is
Yeah,
our job shouldn't be the average person who has resources because you have resources. So have a plan, be self-reliant, figure things out. Our job is for those people who don't have the resource, like somebody who's oxygen dependent, who now is running out of oxygen, or somebody who's on a ventilator that
yeah,
they will die if we don't give them the energy that they need. So we're going to focus on that. It is a hard pill for people to swallow, though, when we tell them that, because people have gotten used to, again, that if they're in trouble, people will come. And so it's a learning thing where we have to retrain people because really, we had, 9/11 happened. We had Hurricane Katrina, and Hurricane Katrina, everybody was like, where's FEMA? Where's FEMA? Who's going to help us? And that really taught us that, that we've been training people wrong. They shouldn't be expecting the federal government to show up the next day and bail them out because that's not
yeah,
exactly what happens. So we need to retrain people to know that 2, 3, 4 days, you might not see anybody. So what can you do in those days to help yourself the most? And then if we are available, great. It's a good time for everybody and we were able to help them. But
yeah,
if we're not there and they've built those systems up as a community, they can help each other out and they'll be just fine. So that's what we're trying to build here is self-reliance, but it's a teaching thing and it's gotta be a cultural thing where we change it over time.
yeah. I pay my taxes. You work for me. I want
Exactly.
help.
Yeah, but don't bother me though, because
It's not my problem.
but I'm
It's yours.
anti-government, so don't come anywhere near me in any other time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be really frustrating, and the amount of calls you get for silly stuff afterwards is, it's just really, uh, but you're not allowed to, you really can't challenge them in the moment. You're actually quicker to just do what you got to do, get into hospital or do wherever it is, than stand there and have the argument because there's other people that actually do
Right.
need your help. I know for a lot of the coverage over here, they had a lot of questions over the Tampa Bay hospital, whether or not that was going to be under threat with the storm surge if that came through. Uh, that I can imagine was heavily in your planning and the holy shit factor.
Yeah, but, all of those hospitals there, they had really good plans in place, and so they do have triggers too for if certain, events, are predicted to be a certain level, then they're gonna take action, but the hospital never did end up having to evacuate. They were on generator power for several days, but they were able to manage that well. We did have the county did set up a special needs shelter, which was really a field hospital, so it was for all those people who might need energy for a medical reason, they could go to that hospital and get the care that they needed. And then there was the general population shelters, which was for people who can come and go as they need to come and go, but it's a place to get
Yeah.
energy. And then they set up points of distribution. So there were areas all throughout the county that were set up with supplies. So people could go and get tarps, water, food, whatever. And then there were comfort stations. And the comfort stations were more about charging stations, right? Or how to get air
Yeah.
conditioning. You could go into an air conditioned area and get out of the
Yeah.
heat. So those were set up all throughout the county, and I really liked how they did that, how they ran that. It was a large logistical operation. They did get a lot of support from the state. Not every state is the same. So if we would have gone to another state, it could have been where no support comes from the state and everything comes from the locals, or it could be completely state led. So it just really depends on where you're at in America.
Yeah. Yeah. When you see the worst of things, you see the worst of people and you see the
Yes,
best of people.
exactly.
Uh, uh, the one that comes to mind for us is in Brisbane in 2011. We had some major flooding, and they mobilised what was called the Mud Army, and you had thousands of people register, and they just went through and cleaned
That's a
people's
great name
houses.
for an organization
And
too.
yep, the Mud Army, and it was a informal thing that became a formal thing because they were doing it anyway. So then it just kind of took a life of its own. Then I think they realized that if they actually start coordinating this, they're actually going to get more bang for their buck. But we had floods up here in 2019, and a lot of towns all got flooded. There was people that took their boats and got people out that were stranded and things like that. And again, it was all very informal. And at the other end of the scale, you've got looters and people that just take
Absolutely.
advantage of it. So you see the worst and the best of society when you're backed against
Yeah,
the
and
wall.
really, I talk about this in my book, the fact that every disaster has this beauty to it that you have to pay attention to. So we all pay attention to all the bad all the time, and the media helps us really pay attention to the bad. But you also have to see how, during a disaster, a community will come together and they'll help one another. Or, you mentioned the Mud Army, we had the Cajun Navy, which was exactly the same thing. It was during a hurricane in Louisiana. A bunch of people with boats just got in their boats and started rescuing people, and now it's a thing, it's an organization, and they do that wherever,
Yep,
so it was an organic thing that just kind of happened, but it was the goodness
yep.
of people who wanted to help their neighbors, help their community, who just went out and did something fabulous, and we can't lose sight of that beauty every day that comes from these bad disasters.
Absolutely. And you're right. Media as a society and as people, negative's so
Oh,
much
yeah,
easier to hold on
absolutely.
to in every aspect of life. Fear and ugliness is so much easier to grab your attention than niceness and beauty. And you're totally right. There was, I was deployed post cyclone at Delhi Beach in Proserpine, about 4 hours south, and there was groups there. They changed their name at the time. I think they were called TRA, and they were former veterans that just volunteered as a response, and they were there
Oh,
just to
Team
help
Rubicon.
people. And it was
Yeah.
that's Team Rubicon. They're called something else now
Oh,
over here, but yes, it was
yeah.
Team Rubicon, and it was the first time I'd come across them, and they were
Yes, they're
fantastic.
awesome, they come into our county all the time to help us out. Yeah, all veterans who just wanna help, others who are in trouble.
We had a little glitch there. Uh, so we're talking about Team Rubicon. Yeah, they came up with their swags and they literally went around to people's houses and said, "What do you
Yeah.
need?" And they were just bloody good people. And and then there was we had it. Oh, what are they called? Orange. Oh, I'm going to kick myself. They've got the word orange and they orange van or something like that. And they literally they're made up of volunteers that go around with vans, big vans with
Oh,
laundrettes
yeah.
in them. And they allow people to do washing and drying because that's stuff we
Oh,
take for granted.
absolutely, yeah, especially when you've been without, your home or your power for several days. Yeah, and it's one less
That's
stressor
right.
too, right? So, you're dealing with all this stress. If you can just have clean clothes and feel like a human, then maybe you can get through the next day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Eh, just a shout out in post production to Orange Sky Australia. They're the orange van I was trying to talk about. They provide laundry services, showers, and just a social chat to people doing it tough right around Australia and in post disaster areas. So yeah, great bunch of people. Back to the show. Thanks. And for a lot of people, even if you don't want help, if somebody knocks on your door and says, "Hi, I'm here. Do you need anything?" The fact that you were able to say no is okay. The fact that somebody asked is the
Yeah,
main
and you have a
point.
contact. So if things change, you have
Yeah.
somebody that you know to call. Yeah.
Yeah, I know in this particular one, I had to basically so we were deployed down to the ambulance station there, and I had to basically kick the officer in charge out and tell him to go home. Because he actually worked through the cyclone, and we went down the day after. As soon as the water dropped enough from the river, we deployed down, and he. It's a remarkable story. As the eye of the cyclone crossed, they got a 000 call for somebody who's he was in his bathtub, I believe, and the taking shelter, and the wall collapsed, and it basically amputated
Oh
his
no.
arm, and he was bleeding out. So as the our thing is that once winds hit X amount, we don't go out. They all go to the cyclone shelter or whatever it is, and you bunker in place. And they got this 000 call, and he was asked, "Do you want to go and help?" What a bloody
Right.
question!
Yeah.
Of course he did. So he grabbed a bunch of people. I think it was other police and fire, and they all went and they saved this guy's life. But they were against the clock because it's only the
Right.
eye, and the blows coming the other way, and they were against the clock. And then while they were out, they said, "Look, we've got this other one. Do you want to do it?" So they just ended up doing two jobs in the middle of a cyclone that every book in the world says, "Do not
Right.
do that."
Yeah, but for emergency responders, that's the problem is that when people fail to evacuate or they fail to take cover, um, the emergency responders are going to do the call, when the call comes in. But that's not
Yeah,
really fair to them either. So people who ignore
no,
those warnings and then they always end up calling because something bad happens. And then you're expecting somebody to
yeah,
put their life at risk for you. Um, it's not fair,
yeah.
but responders will always say, yeah, we'll go ahead and take care of that.
Yeah. Look, when Cyclone Yazi was coming, I told my wife to pick up the children from school and drive south, and they went and stayed. She went and stayed at my parents' for 2 weeks. Towns we were out of power for 2 weeks at our house. You don't want to be
No.
home if you've got somewhere to be somewhere else. You cannot fight a
Right.
cyclone. Uh, the same way as you cannot fight a major flood coming, you cannot fight a major
Right.
bushfire. You've seen people just throw hoses on it. Yeah, you can. There are precautions you can take, but if it's a Cat 5 cyclone or hurricane coming, personally, I don't see the sense of staying there. All you're doing is being another resource drain when and if shit
Right.
goes wrong. And if it doesn't go wrong, go home.
Exactly. Well, and, in this one, they had over 10,000 homes in this one county destroyed. So, you're dealing with people
Yeah,
who
that's
have
a
lost their
lot.
homes. So the last thing you need is people who decided to stay and now they're like, "Hey, when are you gonna get my power up?" It's just one more, drain on the whole resources.
Yeah, but you're always the center of your own
Yeah,
universe.
exactly.
Okay, so let's go on to the book. You mentioned the book
Yeah.
before. How did you and you've released a couple of books, so tell us about the first one.
So the first one I wrote when I was a paramedic, because we work 24-hour shifts, so you have some off time occasionally. And so I just wanted to have a novel published. That was my goal. I didn't market it. I didn't care. So I wrote that it was a Western fiction book. And so I wrote it and then I published it and I never did anything with it after that. So this book was really, it started off with I'm a big journaler. I've journaled my whole life. So I looked back at my journals from when I was a paramedic and I read the stories of some of the calls that I went on, the lessons that I learned. And I just thought, how fun would it be to have kind of a short book with some stories from my paramedic, but then also what did I learn from that story? And they kind of morphed from
Yeah,
there into a book about how we cope with trauma. So everybody deals with trauma, right? So each chapter starts with a call that I went on and it does talk about the lesson that I learned, but I also interweave my life in that and how I learned and grew through those experiences and what I learned from those patients. But I also, how did I learn and cope with the trauma that I faced? And what were those things that I was able to learn as a paramedic that helped me so that I could face life, in a more positive manner? And the reason that I think it morphed over time was because in our field, emergency services, emergency management, we do not do a good job of talking about trauma, our own personal trauma. We hide it, you bury it, deep down, and you just don't talk about it. And so I also wanted to open the door to being able to talk about what we go through, not only seeing the worst of everybody's lives, but also in our own lives, bad things happen. How do we cope with that? How do we learn and grow from it? And then also, what's that beauty that you're going to find in tragedy? So, I'm a student of chaos theory. And so I find beauty in chaos, but that's a mindset, right? So like we just talked about, if all you ever think about is what could go wrong, what will go wrong, or the negative, that is really what your life will be, is all those negatives, and you're going to miss the opportunities along the way to see something grand. Like that woman that I spoke about, the cancer patient, where that is a terrible call because you know that that is her last a ride to go visit her kids, and you know that she's going to die. She has terminal cancer. But if I just focused on that, I would have missed the ability to have a relationship with this woman for 2 hours, talk to her about her kids, make her feel more comfortable. She got to really relive some of her best moments in her life with me, just chatting about it. So I would have missed that, if I wouldn't have done it. So that's kind of what the book ended up being, is kind of seeing the beauty in all these bad things that happen, and not letting that pass you by, but also what are those coping mechanisms that we've all created, and how do we make sure that we can get through the bad times and see something positive on the other side?
How did you learn to see the beauty and the positive? Is it something you consciously did, or did you study it? Have you have therapy? Have you ever gone through the therapy process due to
Yes,
work?
I have gone through therapy, and I'm still going through therapy now. I find it very helpful. It's as I mentioned really early on, I came from an alcoholic background. So we have many alcoholics in my family, not just my father, but all throughout our line. We have people who have died of alcoholism. We've had my great grandfather went insane, and he was abusive to his wife and his children. So all the way through our line, we have that. But because of those experiences, I think what ended up happening is when you come from an alcoholic family, you become hyper vigilant. And so you're always looking out for what's going to come and what's going to hit you next, right? You think that the bottom's going to drop out all the time. Now that's not a healthy thing to do, but I took that and I created a career from it. So as emergency
Yeah,
managers, our whole job is to try to figure out what's the next thing that bad is going to happen. So I was able to
yeah,
create something positive from it, but also as a paramedic and my hypervigilance, the 2 of those going together, when I was on a patient scene, I would be looking around for the threat, and always looking out to see what's gonna go wrong. But also, I think
yeah,
when I did that, because I was hypervigilant, I also saw everything on the scene, so I also got to see the beauty. So I think that's where it came from,
yeah.
is that hypervigilance, not only seeing what's gonna come and hit me, but also seeing how people are reacting, seeing their emotions. It allowed me to change how I interact with people, to calm them. Like, my favorite thing in the whole world is to go into an emergency operations center and work with people, and you see the temperature start to drop, and you see them start to laugh.
Yeah,
The crisis starts to, I mean, they're still dealing with the crisis, but their stress level comes down. And then they start working
yeah,
more efficiently. I love that feeling. There's no feeling better in the world.
yeah. It's the same. It's the same feeling you get when you walk into a scene, and I call it, there's badge
Yeah.
therapy. They see it's the thank
Oh,
God
I
you're
know. You
here.
totally see them relax and they're like, "Oh, help is on the way,"
Yep.
right? So,
Yeah. And my number one thing when I went into a scene is nearly every time I would try and get somebody to
yes.
laugh.
Yeah.
Because if you can get a smile out of their face in their worst, you've done 90% of your breakthrough
Yes.
work.
And as a paramedic, one of the big
It
things I learned was I always stopped before I walked in, took a deep breath, and then I would walk in calmly and speak calmly. And you
Yeah,
could see how that would make all the difference in the world for that person, not just the patient, but the family.
absolutely. Yeah. And if you're calm, look, I've had one case that I remember with that I panicked at, and that was it. It was a gentleman, no, sorry, a lady who we were called to a self-inflicted cut to the throat, walking and talking. And we rock up and she's got a tea towel around her neck. And we're like, okay, come on, show us what you've done. And I'm expecting a paper cut. Well, she's used a box
Oh,
cutter and she's gone right across. And she starts looking up and you can see everything. You can see you can see jugular veins, you can see carotids, you can see her trachea, like, and I dropped out the, oh, fuck. And my partner, because it was one of the few times I was working with someone, he heard that and he's like, "What?" I said, "Have a look at this." And he went, "Oh, fuck." Because we just weren't expecting that. And luckily, everything worked out well. She was, "Oh, am I gonna be home for dinner?" And it's like, "No, you're gonna be on life support soon. You'll be going to taken up and you'll be put on life support, and, this is gonna take a while to recover from." She didn't understand the seriousness of what she'd done, but that's the first time I panicked. Most of my jobs, I made it a priority. You'd go in if grandma has had a fall. The standard line is, "How much scotch did you have for
Yeah.
breakfast?" And they would nearly always have a giggle. And if you can have a giggle, then the mood is down. The daughter or the son or the family member or spouse, they just relax. And when everybody else relaxes, the entire scene just relaxes a bit. And pain drops when you're
Yeah,
not
and you can
panicking.
feel
So
it's
you
just an
don't.
extra feeling, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, when you how were you with emotions on scenes as a paramedic? Did you were you able to display emotion, or were you good at bottling them?
It's weird, ever since I became a medic, when I was on a scene, I really didn't feel emotion. So I would go through, I mean, I would help people and I would be empathetic with them or compassionate. But I don't remember a time where emotions kind of took over for me. And I noticed that too, when the hurricane hit, I was at Hurricane Katrina, but I wasn't there for the hurricane. So this was the first time I
Yeah,
was there for a hurricane. And I was nervous about it before it came, but once it came, this calm came over me, and it was just kind of like you just go through the steps, you do your job, and so I think that that's a coping mechanism as well that emergency responders get
yeah,
is you end up desensitizing enough to be able to get through the call, and then afterward you figure out kind of you feel the emotions and you start to really process it. And I think that that's why I journaled so much because I always wrote
yeah,
everything down. So that was my way of processing what was happening.
yeah. Were you guys able to call deaths over there?
Yes. Yeah, we would call a physician on the
Okay,
phone, and then we would tell them whatever we're seeing, and we would have a strip, the cardiac strip, and then they would tell us whether we could call it in the field, yeah.
okay. Yeah, we don't need to contact a physician. We can with the criteria, and yeah, we can call that ourselves. And then depending on whether or not you know police need to be involved. Sometimes they don't in others, depending, whether you can get hold of a doctor that they have an obvious, history of expected death and that type of thing. Um, what's the name of your book? Tell everyone how, and what's the name of it and how do they
So the
find
book
it?
is called Shaking in the Forest, Finding Light in the Darkness, and it can be found at major booksellers, Barnes& and Noble, Amazon has it, so it can be found there. I don't have it on audiobook, but it is on, Kindle, so you can get it on a Kindle as well or as an ebook.
Yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
okay. No, this has been excellent. What else have we got to cover? What else are you doing now? What are you doing? So what's your current position? You're still doing the emergency management. You're studying your PhD, aren't you?
Yes, I'm in the middle of a PhD for business administration. So the reason I chose that is because I want to change how emergency management does business. So it's an innovation and strategy specialization. So I'm looking at how do businesses innovate in a disruptive world and what are the tools that they use to build a business, and then how do you bring that into emergency management?
Okay. And how long is that expected to take?
So I should be done next year. Sorry, I got a cough.
No, that's okay. That's
So I should
okay.
be done next year. I start my dissertation in January.
Okay. Excellent. Mate, that's cool. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I do thank you for having me though on this. It was great to talk about it. I do think that it is important for people to know that that there is no problem in seeking help. I think that that's a big thing that again in our field we don't seek out help. We try to figure out everything on our own. And I do think that the like I said, part of the reason I wrote this book was to let people know to be a little bit vulnerable. There's a lot in there that's vulnerable about my life. But to show that, throughout these experiences, I've been able to grow and learn and I'm stronger because of it. But if I would have bottled all that up and I didn't process any of it and I didn't talk to somebody about it, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'd also be dealing with a lot of stuff that really you shouldn't have to deal with on your own. So I want to normalize that in our field. And just so if people are really kind of struggling, I just want to make sure that they know that there are resources and people to help out. And that our field
Yeah.
does have inherent dangers for mental health. But if you take care of yourself, it's also can be positive. It's that we call it post traumatic growth instead of post traumatic stress. It's where you take everything that you've been through, you build some coping mechanisms around it that are positive, and you build those relationships that are positive and connections, and from all of that you become a stronger person, and then also you're able to then continue helping others. You don't burn out and you don't leave the field, which is
Yeah.
also something we don't want to see happen.
And I think that's where, like for example, your PhD, organizations need to understand how important they are in the recovery process of how they look after these abnormal
Exactly.
events for first responders. I've recently, or I've got somebody coming on the podcast shortly, and without stealing her thunder, organizational trauma is 12 times more likely to cause PTSD than
Oh yeah.
occupational trauma. We all go to shitty jobs. It's the nature of the beast. Uh, but it's how the organization looked after you that can make the difference between whether or not that particular job or that particular career
Right.
breaks you.
And I do think that in these organizations, the organizations where I think employees thrive is those organizations that allow for failure because it allows for growth. They allow you to innovate a little bit and figure things out on your own. They allow for flexibility in schedules, flexibility in how you do your work. And those businesses, you see people who stick around. And then also they give you better benefit because they're healthier, they're able to stay longer, right? And it builds a community. So I do see that we have to get better as I guess, as a society, at being okay with the unknowns, being okay with unpredictability, being okay with disruptions. And if we can move through them instead of trying to control it all the time, everybody I think will be a little bit healthier. We'll all work together, on that.
Absolutely. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again many times, don't ask anybody in emergency occupations, don't ask them what their
Oh yeah.
worst job is. Ask them what their best
Yeah,
job is.
exactly. Because the best calls are so much fun to talk about, you know?
Yeah. And going through these podcasts and talking to people, all you concentrate on when you're going through PTSD is
Right.
the negative. Because it's the negative that just
And
overwhelms you. It's the
cycles.
negative that you actually have to really search your brain, search your vault for jobs that are positive because they don't
Right.
register.
Yeah.
The one way the person thinks you have, they may have broken their leg and they may not have been going to die, but you were their angel that gave them a laugh, medication, respect, and
Right.
transport. To them in that moment, you were everything. They don't even register on us. We look at the blood, the guts, the death, the
Yeah.
misery, because that's the stuff that society has made us concentrate on. And I've never been asked by a single person in the public realm, what's the best job you've done?
Yeah, that's true. And I do think too that uh when the reason that I think I was able to remember the good stuff was because I wrote it all down when it happened. And so otherwise I think I
Yeah.
would have lost all that stuff along the way and I would have just remembered the big, the bad, and so it's unfortunate. I think everybody should remember the good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely. And I think that is hypervigilance. We are built, that's a survival thing. It's a human thing. It's global. It's not just it's just not our
Right.
culture. Uh, the things there's a couple of things we're really bad at, and that's remembering good things and taking
Yeah, that's
compliments.
true. Very true.
There's nothing more awkward than having a compliment to your face.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
What do I do with that?
Well, I think too,
But,
public servants too, I think have a very hard time with that because they're just like, that's just my job. That's just what I do. They try to brush it off, but you got to be okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's really humbling. Whereas if you were told you were doing something wrong, you kind of not expecting that, but you're already okay with that because it's one of those things. If you don't hear from them, everything's
Yeah,
good, and if you do hear from someone, you're probably in
right.
trouble. So and we need to shift that focus. We need to ask people what's the good things they've done, what's the good memories, what's the laughs. We used to have bad. I remember when I first started in the job, the OIC back in the day used to come to the hospital and he'd put lube on our door handles, or not on a steering wheel or anything like that. Or they'd put lignocaine on the
Yeah.
cup so they'd be able to drink, and then you're dribbling it everywhere the next drink. And little things like that. Or you'd be driving off with your window down, and next thing a super squirter water pistol thing is going through, having a laugh. And ultimately, we all develop that dark sense of
Yes.
humor. I don't know if you could survive in any of those jobs without a
Yeah, I
dark
don't
sense of
think you
humor,
can. Yeah. And I
but it's something you
yes, I
develop.
do think you develop, but I also think that there's certain personalities that thrive in this environment too. And it's because they can kind of laugh at themselves and talk about,
Yeah,
and that's one thing, when we had the worst calls that we ran, we always got together as a crew afterward. Multiple crews would get together for a meal. And part of that was to help with the trauma of that incident. But it was to have a laugh, right? So it's to decompress after the call, make sure the crew knew that they had support systems, but we didn't really usually talk about the call. We talked about just a bunch of random stuff that made people laugh,
yeah,
And I have a whole chapter
yeah.
about all the practical jokes that we did on each other. And I actually kind of feel bad for paramedics today because there were no videos back when I was.
Oh
And
yeah,
so now, like, we used to moon people outside the ambulance. You couldn't do that now. There's too many cameras. We would get fired. So yeah, it was.
yeah. What's that? We're good. Yeah, I totally agree that, and the and you've always got to assume a camera is in your
Oh,
face now.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's everything's almost defensive.
Well, and also people are very anti-government here in America too. So they see
Yeah,
you and they automatically assume that you're wasting their money or you're using their taxpayer dollars. So if you go to like we would go to the grocery store, get groceries, we're on 24-hour shifts. You get somebody who would make a comment about why are they not working? And why well, I gotta
yeah,
eat, So yeah, but
yeah,
now I think the scrutiny is so much higher that there is no downtime for that reason. I think it's because you can't do some of the stuff we used to be able to do where people didn't question it. Everything is on all the
yeah.
time.
Well, I used to work in a small town because there was about 1,500 people there. And I actually got a written complaint once because my ambulance was parked in front of the pub because I went there for dinner with my
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, people don't
I was a member of the community, and it would have been I guarantee it would have been somebody just passing through, like a tourist or something like that. But yeah, to complain that an ambulance is in front of the pub is
right.
ridiculous.
And, back 20 years ago, you would have the community would know who you are. They'd interact with you. It wouldn't be the same, I think, as it is now. It would be more of a family thing, and they'd welcome you into the pub and they'd know why you're there. They'd give you the discount or whatever. So it's definitely a little
Yeah,
bit different now.
yeah,
And that does cause additional job stress when you're not seeing some of the
yeah,
positives there too.
yeah. At the same, over here we don't quite have the anti-government. No, it's sort of going in that direction, but we don't have the anti-government stance that you guys have at the moment. So paramedics and firefighters are nearly always battling it out for most trusted
That's good.
professions in a lot of surveys. So we are generally pretty well respected and welcomed in people's houses. And I'm honest, that doesn't go. That shouldn't go unappreciated by the people that do those
Right.
roles. To be welcomed into people's houses, no questions asked, is a privilege, and it's something that should be humbling. And yeah, it's something that you should be
Yeah, I
proud of.
agree. Absolutely. And, we do still have, I think, for paramedics and firefighters, they're still very well respected here. People always put out the signs when there's a fire or anything else. Thank you, firefighters. Thank you, first responders, which is great because I do think that helps with the
Yeah,
morale, keeping people up, especially when they're
absolutely.
working hard, those long days.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'll give America. They do. What's the word I'm looking for? The where you look after your servicemen, you look after the respect to where the public displays of
Right.
respect is
Yeah.
outstanding.
Yeah. The patriotism, I think, is what you're thinking.
That's the word I was looking for. America does patriotism better than anyone. And the way if somebody dies in the line of service, I get tingles and spine chills when I see those funeral processions and things like that. We don't do that anywhere near the extent that you guys do. And that is something that I wish happened because you guys do it right. There's a lot of things I think you guys
Yeah.
don't do right, but that is one thing it gives me the tingles
Yeah,
when I
I
see it.
agree. And it's a great way to honor a public servant who, lost their life in the line. It's a really good way to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, so again, what's the
So
title
the
of your
book is
book?
called Shaking in the Forest, Finding Light in the Darkness. It's all about finding the good and the bad, finding the good things that happen every day in the bad events and holding on to that so that you're better able to handle the next thing that comes your way.
That's brilliant. And if people want to get hold of you, do you have any sort of
Yeah, I
contacts?
have my website. So it's just lorihodges.com is my website. And then I do have also, I'm on LinkedIn very heavily. I do have Instagram, not really that much. And Facebook, I also have a Facebook account as well. But LinkedIn is probably the best way for people to reach me. I have a big following there. So yeah, reach out. And then if anybody wants a book or a signed book, I can send it to you directly. So just reach out to me and I can get that to you.
Excellent. If anyone forgets or didn't have a pen and wants those details, just send me an email, be on the call, Peter, and at gmail.com, and I will forward all those details on to you that you need. So, Laurie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you. I'm glad you're back safe and sound from your back-to-back deployments. It's been an honor to talk to you, and I wish you luck with your
All right. Well,
PhD. And yeah,
all right.
thanks
Well, you
very
have a good
much.
day.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Call. If you like what we're about, please make sure you subscribe, and if you can leave a review, that would be appreciated. If you have feedback or suggestions for future guests, please contact me via my socials. Please share with your networks and help me expand my reach. It's a great privilege for people to share their stories and allow us to go beyond the call.